November 29th, 1993. The day I was diagnosed with HIV.
I don't want a yard full of fags. As far as I'm concerned, they can ship them all off to an island and let them die of AIDS.
And he comes out of the bedroom. When he came out of the bedroom, he was so gaunt. It was obvious that he had AIDS.
It was Labor Day, 1985. I got a call from a former lover of mine who was living in New York City. And, well, I hadn't talked to Jonathan in quite some time. And while we were on the phone, he asked me if I would come down to visit him in the city. And I don't know why, but I put him off. The next time we spoke, he again asked me to come down to the city, insisted, really. So I said, all right, I'll come down in November, Veterans Day weekend.
March 6th, 1993. The day my father died. I moved in with him about 15 years earlier when my mother had passed. He had called me and he said, "Tom, I can't do all of this. Come home just to live with me until I get back on my feet." So I went back to live with him and went back in the closet. You know, even after all that time, he'd still say things to me like, "You know, I can't really deal with your lifestyle, Tom."
Good, he said, because here's what we're going to do. There are all these plays right now I really want you to see. They have gay characters in them, and they're about AIDS. Now, I don't really know about AIDS, at least not fully, not what it's all about or even how big it is.
He used to screen my phone calls. I'd get home from work and he'd say things like, "Some guy called for you today, Tom. Who are all these guys calling for you? I don't want them calling my phone. Get your own phone." I went to live with him because I loved him. But I didn't like him. I couldn't be myself outside of my own home for fear that I'd embarrass him. But now that he's gone, I'm thinking, I'm 46 years old. I've got to be me. I've got to be myself.
The summer of 1988, my entire life changed. My brother had been living and working in New York for a number of years. He had been a dancer, and later when he moved to the city, he became a personal trainer to a lot of celebrities. So about 2 years before that, he had come home for the holidays, and I noticed he was thin. I mean, he had always been fit, but this time he was thin.
Okay, I'm thinking, I'm gonna go to the city, gonna go on the bus. I'd never been on the bus before. Gonna go see a bunch of plays. Hadn't been to the theater in a really long time, but I do it. And Jonathan meets me at Port Authority, and we go back to his apartment, and he starts talking to me about AIDS. And I still just really don't know where this is going, so I stop him and I say, "Jonathan, do you know people with AIDS?" And he starts to reel off these names. I'm not talking one or two. It was one after another, after another, after another, until he was up to 24 before he stopped to take a breath. And I'm thinking, holy crap, this is way bigger than I thought.
So I drive down to Provincetown, and I pick up one of those rainbow flags, and I put it up in front of the house that my father had left me. My next door neighbor says to me, "You know, it's about time you came out." Oh, I mean, I got the house to myself, the mortgage is paid off, I have no one to talk to, I'm drinking heavy because I just lost my father, and you know, those were also my salad days. Going out, going to bars, going to the rest areas, bathhouses. I was living large.
Well, the next day I went with him to an AA meeting in the city. And well, I just started talking to the guy that I was randomly sitting next to and told him how I happened to be there. And he turned to me and he said, "You know, I remember the first guy I knew who died from AIDS. His name was Joe. He was a model." And I said, "Joe who?" "Joe McDonald. Did you know him?" "Did I know him? I hired him. We did a photo shoot for GQ together in Haiti. I actually got to know the guy pretty well. So now Joe McDonald's become the first guy I know who's died from AIDS. Oh, and this day had just begun."
I was living with my second partner at the time, and Freddie had come home with his friend. for the holidays that year. So during that visit, they're staying with me, and Walter comes up to me and says, "So, how long have you and David been together?" "What do you mean?" "Well, I'm with your brother. So how long have you and David been together?" "You mean with?" And yes, so how long have you and David been together? "How do you know?" "Oh, you guys are so closeted. It's like it's nailed shut. We can see it." I guess we were the only ones who did it.
Well, Jonathan had gotten me a ticket to see the play As Is. And it was just one ticket. He wasn't coming with me. I was going to go by myself. So I took the subway from Chelsea up to Broadway. And I don't know, maybe 20 minutes after the curtain came down, I finally stopped crying. I looked around. I was the last one in the theater. The next night, we went together to see The Normal Heart. Now, this one was by Larry Kramer, and it was theater in the round. So, on all the walls surrounding the audience, around the entire auditorium, were written the names. The walls were covered with the names of people who died. The walls were covered with the names of people who died from AIDS. I started to look for the names of people that maybe I knew. You know, I had never even read the obituaries, let alone this. And then I started to get angry. Then I started to feel real anger. So I get back to Rhode Island on Monday. Tuesday, I get a call from a former college friend of mine who was my astrologer, actually, when we lived in the city. Come on, it was a New Age movement, the 70s. So anyway, while we're on the phone, he says to me, he says, "Ken, did you hear about," this is my former college roommate, he said, "Did you hear about Noel?" And I said, "No. Noel passed away." "Oh, wait a minute, Noel? Noel was a health food freak." So now I'm starting to think about all the people that I have not had contact with in quite some time. So the night after I talk to my astrologer friend, I get on the phone and I start calling around. The first person I call was a former lover of mine who's living in Houston. We were partners for a really long time. He was my first lover. And when we're on the phone, I hear something in his voice. I just know something's wrong. And that's when he tells me that just yesterday, he was diagnosed with AIDS.
My father had decided to retire that same summer, that summer of 1988. It was early June. And the job he had, came with a house, the house that I grew up in. But now that he was retiring, my mom had to move, and they didn't want to buy a house. They were just going to move into an apartment. So I called my brother up and said, "Look, they've got to move. Why don't you come up? You can help me move. They're not going to get a moving company, and they don't have very much. So the two of us, we can do it ourselves in one day." "I can't. I'm really busy right now." But I noticed something in his voice. "All right, whatever. I'll take care of it. Like I've taken care of everything else," I thought to myself. But later, after I had moved them in and had gotten them settled, I started to get angry. I thought, it's just you and me. It's just the two of us. When are you going to start helping out? I mean, they were getting old, and my father had been diagnosed with emphysema because he had smoked his entire life, and it had just stopped recently.
So like I said, I was living life. And it all came to a crashing halt November 29th, 1993, the day I was diagnosed with HIV.
Oh man, I am screaming to the universe now. All right, I get the message, but what do you want me to do with all of this, huh? So I call up my friend Bob Hitt and I tell him what I'm going through. I say, "Bob, what needs to be done? I need to do something." And that was the beginning. Rhode Island Project AIDS, Office Money, and the Buddy Project.
It was a Saturday. It was the Saturday of... I'll never forget it. Every year it hits me like a brick. It was the Saturday of St. Mary's Feast, and the salon had been very busy that summer. So early that morning, Walter, my brother's friend, calls me and says, look, you've got to get a plane. You've got to come down to New York and help me. Walter, I am not getting on any plane unless you tell me. Does he have AIDS? No, it's not that. He's got cancer. And he didn't want anyone to know. He's on a lot of medication. And he almost burned the house down. I need for you to come down and help me. All right, I'll be there. I'll be there this afternoon. Just pick me up at the airport. So I cancel all my appointments. I catch a flight to New York. Walter picks me up at the airport. And we drive out to Long Island where they live. Walter, why didn't you tell me? He didn't want anyone to know. He swore me to secrecy. Walter told me later that he'd been like this for the last 6 months. It was full-blown AIDS. It wasn't just a little setback. Yes, he had cancer, rectal cancer, but there was always something else that you got sick from because of the AIDS. Anyway, that morning after I spoke to Walter, I told him to put Freddie on. So my brother gets on the phone and I tell him I'm coming down, and he starts to tell me, no. And I'm like, look, I'm coming, that's it. Well, if you're coming, can you do me a favor? Can you go to Olneyville and pick me up some hot weenies, a dozen all the way? Can you imagine what that plane smelled like with me and a dozen hot weenies? So we get to the house and I put the weenies on the kitchen table and he comes out of the bedroom. When he came out of the bedroom, he was so gone. It was obvious he had AIDS. I didn't say a word. I hugged him. And then I said, for whatever reason you had to do what you did, that's fine. But I want you to know that I'm here now, and I'm going to take you home and I'm going to take care of you. And he starts to argue with me, and I say, look, there's not going to be any conversation around this. You're going to come home, and I'm going to take care of you.